My name's Justin Pirie. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm better known as an analyst blogger in the software as a service and cloud computing space, and as a community manager, where I run one of the largest software as a service communities in the world. I work at a company called Mimecast, and for those of you that don't know us, we provide what we say is cloud services for Microsoft Exchange. Now that's quite a big, mouthy, sentence. So what are cloud services for Microsoft Exchange? Well, they are email archiving, place to put all those emails, email continuity, and email security. So you got used to the flashing slides yet? Yeah, it's going to stop. It's not going to stop. So in the old days, how was this problem solved? And it was typically a lot of this. And for many of you, this is the reality in your server rooms today. A lot of kit, a lot of tin, a lot of wires, a lot of dependencies. And what we did is we've taken a lot of that complexity and we've delivered it as a service in the cloud. And most importantly, what do users get? Well, users get unlimited storage. You never have to worry about PSTs or running out of storage ever again. A bottomless archive. They get fast search of that bottomless archive, and they get 100% uptime. So email never has to go down again. Even if you need to do maintenance, or as if some of our clients have had their power cut off, their internet cut off, or even their building on fire. But I wouldn't want to wish that on anybody. And we are very close to 1 million users. So we're one of the largest software as a service companies that's privately owned in Europe. So we really are growing fast. Now, I'm delighted today to introduce Paolo Picone. We are going to do a Morecambe and Wise style double act. I'm the serious one, he's the funny one. And we are going to try and intersperse our presentations with some sort of analytical industry stuff with some real practical experience. Now, I'm really delighted to co-present with Paolo today, because Paolo was head of head of infrastructure for a big law firm and a customer for 4 years, and now he has crossed to the dark side. He has crossed to a partner. He's actually selling Mimecast. He loved it so much. So, Paolo.
Yes, indeed. Thanks, Justin. Yeah, I was with Ashurst, big international law firm, top 10 law firm, 16 offices worldwide, about 2,000 users, had about 50 direct reports. I was with them for the whole of the last decade and a little bit before as well. And as Justin said, I was so pleased with the product, I decided to join the dark side and actually start selling and start promoting the brand, as it were.
Thank you. Yeah, 50 direct reports, that's a lot of people. I'm glad I don't.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it is a challenge, as with all these things, and I'm sure there's a lot of people in the room who face similar challenges. We had a situation when I joined, there were about 5 servers, and by the time I'd left, we'd virtualized about 300 odd. So, typically your teams grow, and throughout the kind of mid-noughties, lots of systems came on board, lots of complexity, which we'll talk about in more detail, lots of challenges around that, and clearly that means more staff to actually run those systems.
So, cloud, technical or organizational? So, I mean, not everybody has been to another quite a few of you have been to a Cloud Circle event before, but not many of you have seen me present before. So why are we really here? And the reality is if you follow Gartner and Gartner's hype cycle, as you can see, cloud computing is right at the peak of inflated expectations. That's why it's such a hot topic and people want to do something about it. And what's really driving that is cloud and mobile are really driving the consumerization of IT. Things are changing faster than ever before. And I wanted to bring mobile into here because I think there's something really interesting happening in the mobile space at the moment. I mean, who's got a smartphone in their pocket at the moment? Raise your hands. Yeah, I mean, pretty much everyone. Because in Q4 2010, smartphones actually outsold PCs. This was the predictions. Smartphones beat the predictions that the bankers made about shipments. So smartphone manufacturers are actually shipping more smartphones than PCs are being manufactured. So the world is dramatically changing. So we need to come up in IT with new ways that our users can get to corporate IT and be more effective in their workload. And the really interesting thing there is that app consumption has now beaten the mobile web consumption on smartphones. So not only have we got a new type of device to deal with, we've also got a new type of application category to deal with. And for the first time, people have better IT at home and in their pocket than they have at work.
And this is an interesting challenge for all of us. Can I have a show of hands on anyone who's had the user come up to them and say, why are our PCs here so rubbish? Why can't I have what I've got at home? Yeah, I thought as much. And you know, typically we counter that argument correctly by saying we have to standardise. We have to provide something that's fit for purpose. We have to standardise on models of PCs to keep our costs down, to keep efficiencies going. And typically what's happening now is that kind of scenario is wearing a little bit thin with users, and the generational gap means that people are now more used to the consumerisation side of things, and that's presenting us with different challenges. And typically, if we look at Facebook revolution, there are perceived issues with this still in a lot of organisations. I came across it myself, and this is the fact that you have, if you open this stuff up to people, there is a perceived loss of productivity. And the argument has always been there that people will spend more time organising their social lives than they will actually doing work. And whilst that may have been true a while ago, things are changing. They're definitely changing. There is a shift in the way people communicate. And this is the consumerisation bit that's coming in. Productive at home, wanted at work. The line is changing. Sorry, I was going to say, Justin, the line is changing. It's shifting now between what people do at home and what people do at work. And the fact that a lot of it's getting combined. We're having to do more with less. We're having to spend more time working, and we're having to juggle busy lives. And that's really making some changes to the way we actually work.
And we talked about this before, you know, at the work and personal technology are converging. And you had a great saying that you told me earlier.
Which was?
This is brilliant. You know, that for the first time, actually, that our work is following us. You know,
yeah,
like
that's true.
With email in your pocket, you know, you never stop working, and I think we need to change the way we visualize
the gap is narrowing, and it's all about work not being a place and activity. And I think a lot of people have held that belief for some time, but when it actually comes down to the crunch, a lot of employers still don't recognise that in its fullest way, because it's quite difficult actually to put it in place.
So we have a big dilemma in IT, don't we?
We do.
Is it empowerment or is it control?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, because a lot of HR departments tend to guide what people are allowed to do. And typically, if you look at HR policies over the years, they're sort of driven by IT. You will not surf the web and do certain things within work hours. You will not access these types of websites. You will not do personal email, etc., etc. Those are the kind of things that are now misunderstood, I think. And I think certainly where I've worked over the last few years, there's been a change. And we have to allow people to start working in that way. Let's have another show of hands of any companies who allow online banking, for instance.
I mean, there was a slight delay. They were like, oh, of course we allow online banking.
Right, but a few years ago, that was perceived as, well, hang on, this is personal stuff, why are you doing it at work? Actually, we expect more out of our employees now, so we have to allow them to be able to manage certain parts of their personal lives as well. And I think that's the area that's starting to actually impinge, you know, across the divide, as it were.
So the big question then is, has the perimeter gone? You know, was there a perimeter, or has it actually gone?
This is an interesting one as well. A lot of organisations say, we've got security, we've got this, we've got that. How many people allow USB sticks? Do you monitor them? No, okay, interesting. How many people really lock their desktops down or provide maybe VDI to the desktop? How many are thinking of doing that? Okay, there you go, it's quite interesting. There were more hands for those people who allow these things to be plugged in, which really means that our perimeter isn't there, because we're allowing information to be copied off. And we're relying on the trust of our employees and their loyalty to make sure that that data is treated in the right way.
So there's a great quote from Star Wars, which is, force can't solve all problems. The more you tighten your grip on the more Star systems will slip through your fingers. So we can see clearly that people have got a very pragmatic approach to letting things like USB, because they want their users to be productive. And the more you grip, the more that's going to squeeze through. Because we can't control users anymore. You know, especially the more tech-savvy ones with smartphones in their pocket, you can't ban smartphone from coming into the workplace. You know, it's very hard. And you know, do we want to be an organization that treats our users with that much distrust? But the problem we have, and I think this is one of the fundamental problems we have, is that there's what I would call an asymmetry of risk.
Yeah.
All the risk, you know, all the benefits are actually accrued to the business of doing stuff, more stuff with technology. But, you know, all the risk is carried by IT.
And I think there is a good reason for this. And that's typically that IT often don't have a handle on what the business risks are, reputational or otherwise. And businesses are exposed, and IT departments are often left to do what they do. And they don't necessarily understand which things are beneficial or acceptable. Now, I'm sure this is true of all organisations, but certainly in my experience has been that IT tend to operate independently.
So who gets the blame then when things go wrong?
And is it any wonder, again, we're talking about lack of governance. Certainly, again, in my experience, governance from the business to IT has been a really tricky one to broach, because you're talking about, you know, the business doesn't necessarily understand IT, they just think it's the computer on the desk. But actually, it's all the stuff that's below the tip of the iceberg above the water that needs to be understood. And IT tend to second guess what's going on in the business, try and do the best they can.
So that's the sort of the environment we're operating in. That's the scene, so to speak. So I'd like to think about the challenges that we want to look at today, which is people or technology. People, you know, the people that you know, that come into work every day, not these guys, hopefully, and the stuff that we actually run our businesses on. Or perhaps it's both. Perhaps both of them have got an issue. So I'd like a show of hands. Who's using cloud today in their business? Okay, that's really cool. I don't know why this side has got more. Who's thinking about using cloud? Okay, that's pretty cool. And who's still unsure? Okay, got it, cool. So some difficult questions from here and here in the break. The problem, I think, is we have too much choice about what to do with our IT real estate. And, you know, are you going to do email? Are you going to do CRM? Are you going to do virtualization? You know, what are we actually going to do when we move to the cloud? And that's one of the big problems with this big marketing term being lumped in with lots and lots of different technologies. And what I found interesting when I was researching for this presentation was that choice is actually demotivating. If you've ever read Dan Ariely's Predictably Irrational, he talks about a paradox where actually people think more choice makes them happier in the sort of free world economics. But actually, it's not the case. And there's a really cool little simple experiment. I mean, of course, they did really complex and difficult experiments with lots of variations and proper stuff. But there's a really, really interesting little one, which is they messed with a jam display in a store to test people's choice, people's preference for choice. So when they put 6 jams on the shelf, a jar of jam was bought 30% of the time. When they put 24 on the shelf, jam was only bought 3% of the time. And they replicated this with students, with workers, and all sorts of fancy case studies. But what it proves is with too much choice, people don't necessarily want to decide for fear of choosing the wrong thing. And I sometimes feel in the corporate IT world that we live in, which is large, it's complex, it's interconnected, it's varied, whether we have too much choice. So part of today is I want to pull out the issues with choosing the technology and the people to provide that technology. And how can we make those choices simpler, make it easier? I'd like to give you perhaps a frame of reference. It's called the technology life cycle. And the technology life cycle talks about what competitive differentiation and where that technology is at the stage of its life cycle. So this was developed by a guy called Simon Wardley. And if we look down at the bottom left, this where the innovation piece is, that piece there is when it's unique, when it's truly competitive differentiating, and there are very, very few people who have it. You move up the life cycle in towards utility services and through products and commodities, and that's when you can buy it on demand, and there's basically no differentiation. And if we look at the CRM market, you can see it started off in the 70s with a customer-centric concept, went through the 80s with lists, Siebel in the 90s, and then Salesforce in 2002, and probably at the top now you can buy Sugar and other open source systems. That type of technology has become ubiquitous and commoditized. And the thing is, the reason I bring that up is because commodity IT services are some of the best candidates for cloud services because they're not providing any competitive differentiation. So and they're completely ubiquitous. So if they've got those two aspects, they probably are some of the best candidates for looking at using a utility service. So how can we reduce our choices so that we can actually make easier decisions about which cloud services to take? And one of the things I like to do is use research. So this is the Goldman SaaS survey from 2010. They haven't repeated it in 2011 yet, so it's a little out of date. But from a SaaS perspective, where you're buying software as a service, there's some really interesting things. You know, web, CRM, counting, email, collaboration. Those are the top 5 things that people were buying then for collaboration. And when the Cloud Industry Forum ran this again in 2011, this is only weeks old, this research, people are doing, if you add in the infrastructure side, people are putting data backup and DR, which is fantastic services to put there, data storage, email, companies like Mimecast and Microsoft are going to be presenting, and then think about collaboration and ops. So there's some really low-hanging fruit there that people and your colleagues and your peers are putting into the cloud so they can make choices and do things quickly. So this presentation really is about how we can manage the risks, both people and technology, and move up from the innovative stuff, the unique stuff at the bottom, through the product stage, and then how do we get from product to utility, which means disruption of existing relationships and technology, transition, and then management associated with effectively an outsourced activity. So firstly, I want to think about the people issues. And the thing about the technology lifecycle is that the different stages, they need different personalities. Not everybody can cope with each stage of the lifecycle. Not everybody's good. And Simon Wardley expressed this brilliantly. He talked about 3 personality types for the stages of innovation. The first type is pioneers. These are your go-getters, the people who are not afraid of risk, people who are not afraid of failure. They often fail, but their successors are responsible for your competitive advantage. You know, they are your Leonardo da Vinci's. The next type is settlers. Settlers take the good stuff that the pioneers did and make it workable. You know, they build houses, they build farms, they build fences. You know, they make things usable and safe. And they're a bit like your Machiavellis who make things usable. And the final type, the final archetype, is town planners. They're your engineers. They make things really scalable. So they make things operationally effective. You know, they're a very, very, very safe pair of hands. You can trust them with pretty much anything, and they're going to give you the right results. They're your Vitruvius. But the problem we have in IT is that if we don't characterize these archetypes and we mix up the people on projects and treat them all the same, we could be in for a massive failure. And that's us as IT as a profession rather than, and as a strategy rather than, you know, the technology. So I wonder whether we're doing exactly that with IT in the cloud today.
I think often IT departments aren't clear on business requirements. That's part of the reason this happens. They're often asked to save money and to put in point solutions to actually, you know, just to deal with an issue. Invariably means that IT end up making decisions on behalf of the business without being completely informed. And that's why we get some of the problems that we get.
So I wonder then, how do people react when, you know, taken outside of their comfort zone? See, I don't react very well, and not many people react well. So if you're mixing up, if you're asking the town planner to do a pioneer's job, or a pioneer to do a town planner's job, then we inevitably butt heads. And that head-butting, I think, to date in the cloud has been around security. Because if you ask a town planner whether he wants to outsource his job, his reaction isn't necessarily good. But if you ask a pioneer whether he can utilize cloud services to do something better, then you often get a better result. And what I think you really say, when you ask a town planner that question, what they're really saying is, I'm not comfortable. And I think that's really interesting, because people don't talk about that a lot, do they?
No, they don't. In fact, in my experience of you know, putting stuff into cloud, you know, on the front line, I don't think I've ever sat in a meeting where I've asked my guys, are they, you know, what are their issues? nobody's ever actually come up to me and said they're not comfortable. They've used the security card before now, and the various other things, but nobody's ever said they're not comfortable.
And the second thing they say is, it's outside my control. So I think we need to tackle that issue head on.
I think you do, and actually, that's already old-fashioned as a view, because things are changing. Even the services that are available now in the cloud, they offer enough control. And I think that's the differentiation. It's not, it's out of my control. The question should really be, is there enough control for my organisation?
So thinking about those two key areas for success, if we're going to tackle, as a group, if we're going to tackle a successful cloud implementation, what do you think we should do, Paolo?
I think buy-in is really important, and that's the way I've chosen to tackle that in the past. You've got to get buy-in from your IT department. They need to understand the business processes, the reason, the drivers behind it. They also need to feel comfortable. And as leaders, we have to actually make sure that they have an environment that they are comfortable in to air their views. I certainly found that helped me actually transition a lot of the services that I was running into the cloud.
So what about security? What makes cloud secure?
Well, there is obviously the obvious questions that everyone comes up with in terms of, you know, what Okey-Cokey 2000 device do you have for securing it? Are you FIPS compliant? Do you have this? Do you have that? Are you ISO 27? Is my data secure in a tier 4 data center? Who has access to it? All of that stuff. But actually, fundamentally, in order to understand what can get out, what can get in, is understanding the structure of your data and where it is. And typically, a lot of organizations struggle with that.
I mean, it's hard, and I think one of the most important things that I say at all these presentations is that there are cloud providers and there are cloud providers, and one of the most important things is to do due diligence on cloud providers when you're buying the solution, so you make sure you get it right. Because, you know, from my perspective, cloud is often more secure than an on-premise solution. And the reason is cloud providers spend approximately 10 times what a customer spends on security. So they spend between 4% of revenue on security. You know, there are not many organizations that have, or IT organizations that have 4 to 7% of organizational revenue as budget, let alone for security. So there's a massive difference there. So the next thing is that over half of security incidents last year were actually insider-led issues. So if you think about the Google hacking, if you think about the RSA hacking, you know, that was the RSA piece was a flash exploit on a desktop. So often the data isn't taken from the central location. It's actually taken from desktops.
And we talked about USB earlier when we talked about the perimeter. But think about hard copy. Think about iPods, iPhones, iPads, Blackberries. How much stuff is on those little SSD cards that are inside those devices? How many people actually copy stuff out to private email accounts to work on them? How often then are those attachments saved locally to a device that may be not even pin locked? All of these kinds of things.
So I have an open question, and it's not something that I can answer, which is, do we want IT to have all the keys today? Or do we want IT to have an oversight role over infrastructure? You know, which is more powerful? Which can get more benefit? But the key is that IT needs to be delivering competitive advantage to the business.
And I think the importance there is again, reiterating the message that IT is actually part of the business competitive process. In most organisations, it has been seen as just a cost and, you know, IT just go away and do this and provide. But actually, IT need to be closer to the business. They need to understand that they are part of that process. And therefore, they need to be included a lot more.
And it's not just about keeping the lights on anymore. So I think there's a big fear about cloud, which is about IT people losing their jobs. Yeah, your P45 is in the post. But the reality is it couldn't be far from the truth. And there's actually some science behind this. It's called Jevons paradox. Efficiency does not cause less to be used in an elastic market, because even though the costs might go down, the demand actually more than doubles. So actually what we found with our customers, when they stop having to deal with an archive appliance or a spam appliance on site, and they shift to a cloud service, so those people that were dealing with all that spam and archiving issues, they actually get reassigned to different teams to do different activities that add more value to the business. The cost is less, and they free up resources internally. It's quite magical, that approach. So we're not seeing, and as an industry, we're not seeing IT people lose their jobs. The reality is that more IT is going to be needed, but it's going to be different. The job is going to change. It's not going to be about shifting tin and plugging stuff in anymore. It's going to be much more added value.
I think over the next few years, as cloud or outsourced services gets adopted more, I think we're going to be seeing more IT departments repurposing and actually being part of that transition. It's a big piece of work. So we're going to see a lot of people shifting over to that side, I think.
Yeah, I mean, deploying a hybrid architecture, for example, is not a straightforward approach.
It's not. It's all about, again, understanding where your data is, understanding what your service catalogues are, understanding what your SLAs are with the business, and meeting those and understanding what systems affect what. So
the net effect, I believe, and certainly is my experience, is that users are a lot happier. There's not the problem like we used to have in the 90s, of bringing users with you, because users are driving those changes. They've got those smartphones in their pocket and they want stuff to move.
And I think fundamentally we must never forget the golden rule, that the fact that we are service providers in IT. We are service providers. We're there to provide the tools that allow people to do business.
So what about the technology then? How do you get the right, have you got the right lifecycle personality in your team to deliver the technology? Because what we are doing is we are going through a transition phase from product to service to outsourced utility. And there are lots of issues there. IT is complicated, and most importantly, you aren't greenfield sites.
No, and that's true. Most organisations have lots of legacy environments. The problem with legacy environments are they often tend to go on for years and years and years. And then you get to a point where the people who were originally involved in either architecting them or writing them are no longer available. There will come a point where that becomes unsupportable. So really, grasp the nettle and start transitioning this stuff now.
Because we need the new IT architecture to make that happen, but we also need trust. And that's one of the key elements of moving from a product to a service. We need trust in the service provider. And that means SLAs. That's absolutely critical.
One of the main barriers to transitioning services to the cloud is SLAs. Are they tight enough? Do they fit in with what you're comfortable with as a business? Do they actually fulfill what they say they're going to fulfill?
And then what about security of supply? Is the provider going to be around when you need them to be? Can they meet the promises, especially in service management, that they say they can?
Yeah, the quality of service aspect is important. If you start pushing your systems out, then you want to make sure that your eyes, ears, hands and the responses are what your users are used to, so that the level of service transition is seamless.
And we've talked about security. That's a critical element if you're going to move from a product to a service. And also governance. Now, one of the interesting things about governance is that IT departments haven't been well funded, in my opinion, to do governance. So we've often taken a very hard line in that, of things we can and can't do. And I think, shifting the governance piece is going to be a very interesting piece of IT. And that includes the legal and compliance access.
Yeah, I mean, my background is legal, and I'm sure there's a lot of finance people here as well. Jurisdictional issues are a big one. Putting stuff into the cloud, you can't use the Google model, the meshed model, because you don't know where your data's going to be. So you actually have to understand fundamentally whether that's going to be an issue for your organisation. And also there are local laws, data protection laws, disclosure laws that need to be taken into account. And all of these things need to be approached with the vendor up front.
And then moving to outsourcing from the service, vendor lock-in is a massive issue. Can you get your data out is absolutely critical. And then pricing competition. If you're locked in, how do people compete? And who's got control? So one of the things that we need to do is adapt business processes.
And also, sometimes it's often easier to change the business process than it is to try and fit the technology in around it. If you're going to an outsourced model where you are buying a utility, and let's face it, that's what this is all going to, trying to fit the technology that you don't own around the business process is actually going to be quite difficult. And in some cases, it's easier to do it the other way around without any kind of loss of value to your business.
So this all needs integration. We can't have a deliberate strategy. It can't be all or nothing. You know, you don't have to jump head first. You know, and I don't think IT departments should be afraid of some failure. You know,
I think you're right. I think importantly, we've mentioned it earlier, the slide earlier, the SIF slide about the stuff that's actually getting taken up in the cloud at the moment. Stuff that you can run in line, backups, archiving, email management. These are all things that can be run in line with systems. Your IT departments can gain confidence and they still have a fallback in their current systems. Obviously, we have to manage that to make sure that they don't hang on to it for too long. But these are all ways of getting confident with the technology.
So when you're thinking about negotiating your contracts, it's really important you think birth, marriage, and divorce, so that you know how to get out. So if it fails, you know how to get out. And one of the things that we need to do is we need to keep an eye on the spaghetti that we've created and the spaghetti we're going to get. So it's really important that we move that forward. And through the hybrid stage, because a lot of people are doing hybrid, I'd really like to encourage you to start your journey today. Get yourself cloud ready, but do it at your own pace. So that might be hybrid, that might be inline. There's some really interesting approaches. Or let the cloud come to you with certain types of solutions. I would like you to join me in thanking Paolo. It's been great presenting with you. Thank you very much for your time today. Cheers. Thank you.